In this video, I'm going to walk you through the basic steps of the Zentangle method while we make our very first Zentangle, which is just a warm-up or practice before we start our major assignment. So the first step that they give you is to have appreciation and gratitude, because this is a meditation. Then the next step, they have you do corner dots. So we won't do these right at the corner. We're going to leave a border. And then we are going to connect these dots. And you do not have to connect them with a straight line. So you can really create all kinds of interesting shapes. And then in the next step, they tell you to draw a string, and you can do this in a lot of different ways. That string can be curvy, they say. It can touch the edges of the border. It can even be a series of straight lines. So I'm going to do this in some kind of interesting way. Right? And then they tell you to tangle, and they say that a tangle is a predefined sequence of simple strokes that make up a pattern, and they recommend that you draw your tangles in pen. So we are going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to show you another example of the beginning of one of these Zentangles. So you can see in this one, my string just simply goes from one side to the other. So I'll play with a couple of these and give some pointers. My first pointer is that when you start to create these shapes, that you start with some larger shapes. So we've already divided this into some large spaces. So rather than starting with little tiny details, I do recommend that you start with some larger shapes. And repetition is really the name of the game. In addition to that, you are going to end up going over these initial lines, and you can add to them as well. And you can use repetition throughout that process. Notice here I'm having my shapes touch one another, so that's creating a feeling of overlapping. So as you're creating your own Zentangle, you definitely don't need to copy the same types of shapes that I'm making. You can do your own thing. One thing I am going to do, even though I'm going outside of this initial border, I'm still leaving a good amount of white space around this, and that'll make it easier when we crop the photos. You can turn this as you work, however is comfortable for you. So just using lots of repetition. So trying to stay with shapes that are a little bit on the larger side. Now maybe I want to start bringing a little bit of variety into it. Notice if I make a mistake, I can just go over that and make that sort of disappear into a thicker line, make that feel intentional. So notice I am going over anything that I did in pencil. I'm going to go over that in pen. If I want to keep that. One time you may want to do some work in pencil is if you want to make it easier to do some overlapping. So now I'm picking up my pencil so that I can purposely do some more overlapping. So I'm going to double this, and I'll double this as well, make that appear to fold over. And then now that I've doubled those, I can erase there a little bit. Then I can have another sort of double line or ribbon go underneath that. So I can have that stop at that edge and then keep going over here, or I could draw through and then I can go back and erase the parts that I want to appear to go underneath. So here we stop at that edge. So this will appear to go underneath this wider ribbon here. And you can start to use shading as well. I'll shade the thing that I want to appear to be underneath or that goes behind. So I'm using a little bit of stippling there at the edge. And that helps create that illusion. The thing that is a little bit darker will appear to go back in space. Now I'm going to keep going with this. I've done some sort of large and medium shapes. So now I can continue to add details. And remember, repetition is really what we want. That's not a boring thing here. That's really something that's just going to add interest. So the principles of design that we're primarily working with are contrast and repetition. And as I'm starting to add details, I may also start to think about areas that I want to fill in with black, and then after that some lighter shading. So an area like this that I'm filling in with some denser detail is also going to appear to be darker or a medium kind of value or tone. I mentioned that you can cover up mistakes by essentially just adding some thickness to your line or filling that area in black. So since I had that happen over here, I'm just going to make that part of my pattern. And if things don't come out exactly how you're planning them, you can just adjust your plans. So I was planning to make this part inside here black, but then I didn't want that black to come right up next to the other black. I'll lose that contrast. Okay, continuing to add shading. I'm going to continue adding to this pattern. I want to also make some areas where I use overlapping more, so the way I made that ribbon go underneath these other shapes, I'm going to do that a little bit more. So I could do that with pen, but sometimes it helps to do this with pencil. So I can do kind of a loop-de-loop even. So I'm basically making that illusion that it goes through like this. Alright, so I have these kind of lines that sneak back and forth there, and then I'm going to ink those. And I've been mostly using this one pen, but I do want to think about using some thinner and thicker lines. So I kind of started to do that over here with my black shading. All right. And we had talked about how we can make some of those areas appear to go back in space even more by adding some shading. Maybe before we do that, we can add some other value as well. Maybe I'll do that shading first. So we did stippling here before. I could try using my graphite pencil a little bit, so getting right up to that edge and then just shading and then letting that lighten. So anywhere where the one ribbon goes underneath, you can have that a little bit darker, so I could keep going in all these areas. And then let it lighten up. So I'm using very, very small marks and letting that fade. Notice here too, if I don't have the black lines actually touching one another all the way, it will not create the illusion that it really goes through. So if I miss some places, I can go back and try to fix those. So fixing your craftsmanship is important. One thing that we haven't talked about yet is using shading in something other than an object. So we can use shading in the negative space as well. So I could fill in some of these areas black. And if you get to another area that is also black and you want to preserve the contrast, you can handle that in a couple of different ways. You might essentially create kind of a white outline by stopping just a little ways from that area where you think the two things might be too close in value. So that's what I'm doing right there. Or I could also gradually change the value. So if I started black here, but I don't want it to go right up to this other black, I could start to use stippling and have that go from black to white. So we don't have those two areas competing. So I would keep adding shading to this. You want to use some shading that's black. You can also use some shading that's gray with your pencil. The one thing to watch out for though is you don't want to fill in everything. You need to leave areas that are white. So keep looking at it. You want a good kind of balance of areas that are dark and light in order to maintain contrast. So this isn't necessarily finished, but I would keep going with this design. I might add smaller details as well as continuing to add shading until it feels complete. Going through and revising is also important. So areas where maybe I messed up a little bit, you can always go back and think of creative ways to fix those. So filling in an area darker, maybe adding some more thick lines to make that feel like that one line was intentional. So sometimes it's these little accidents that you have to get creative to fix that make your work really interesting. So that's why we call them happy accidents, if you've ever heard Bob Ross say that. Sometimes people will also have little areas where maybe something's sticking out like that. They went over when they didn't mean to. So you can change those into extra little decorative elements. So again, just making it feel like that was intentional and playing with that. I've continued to add shading and pattern and detail. I'm going to erase any of the pencil lines that I don't want to see anymore. And I may continue to add some more graphite shading. And as I go, I'm also looking for areas where maybe I see little mistakes, lines that haven't connected all the way. And continue to add, and I keep looking, I keep turning the piece as I go to evaluate how it looks. Because I could definitely get carried away with the shading and the detail, so you want to also know when to stop. And that may be where I stop for now. I might come back to this, or because this is really just my warm-up and my practice, maybe I'll just take these lessons that I learned and I'll apply them to my finished piece. So there you have it. There is my finished warm-up. The final step is to put your name on this. You're going to flip it over. You're going to get your pencil out because we don't want our marks to bleed through the paper. And you will put your name in whatever you want to call the bottom right-hand corner. And you'll also put your bell. So since this video might be for all the classes, I don't know which one to write. I'll go with B. So if I were in B bell, I would write B bell. And my name. Remember to do that last part, adding your name in pencil.